Welcome to The Deep End by On Deck, a podcast where visionary builders, creators, and experts discuss world-changing ideas. I'm your host, Marshall Kozlov. Let's dive in.
If you're Jay Leno and you're Letterman, you actually want to work together to make really great content. And that's where you see like on TikTok stitching and everything, like it's better to play nice and to bring these followers together and to amplify and to get more attention and to do these crossover events than to say, actually, no, we're competitors because there's only one slot. So I think that what's been filling that vacuum is what should be a really good energy for collaboration.
The Deep End, we're creating a space where we skip the surface level and go in depth into ideas that matter. I'll be your guide as we explore possible futures of commerce, higher education, art, governance, longevity, and more. Joining me this week in The Deep End is Josh Kaplan. Josh was an early employee at Morning Brew and was a product manager during their meteoric rise as a media company. Now, he's taking what he's learned as an operator in a creative space and applied it to his role as co-founder and CEO of SmoothOps to help content creators scale their businesses. Today's conversation is about the deeply challenging logistics involved in the creator economy. Josh contends that most creators find themselves thinking relatively short term. While it's important to focus on producing great content, it's also important to plan for the future, not just the next podcast episode or newsletter. Creators need operators as partners to help them think about how to build for the long term, even as they focus on the next project at hand. This core theme led us in all sorts of interesting directions. We discussed the competition for talented producers on the front lines of creative markets, how the flow of social relationships has changed, how to create optionality for content creators throughout their careers. Josh also gives his optimistic vision for the future and reminds content creators to have fun. As a content creator myself, I had a blast recording this episode of Josh and think you'll enjoy listening. The Deep End is produced by On Deck, where top talent goes to accelerate their ideas and careers. We hope that those who listen to the ideas on the show are inspired to build. To learn more about On Deck's programs, visit beondeck.com. For show notes and additional resources related to The Deep End, check out ideas.beondeck.com. Josh Kaplan, welcome to The Deep End.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
There's been a million different conversations, a million different places about the creator economy. So I don't think to a certain degree we have to rehash all of that. But I think what you usefully bring to that well-trod topic is that you're approaching it through the context of being a creator operator. So it would be good for you to explain what it is that you do with SmoothOps, how you conceive of yourself within that role, and then what specific niche you're filling within a broad space that's gotten a lot of energy in it.
That's a great introduction question. I can figure out how far to step back into my relatively short career to best answer the creator economy entrance. And I think everybody has pretty interesting answers as to how they got into it, because this wasn't taught in school. You don't major in the creator economy. But for me personally, it starts where I started my career for real at Morning Brew, where we were focused on newsletters and podcasts. Pretty traditional media type of business model, followed in the footsteps of the Skim, of the Hustle, rather than the BuzzFeeds and the Vices of the world. And I had this great opportunity of being a bit of a canary in a coal mine for the company, being the Alex Lieberman used to call me the Swiss Army knife at Morning Brew. And so as we were really scaling these business-oriented newsletters and podcasts, I would be the first one to go try a new product, to go hire somebody, onboard them, build the onboarding process, maybe move our office, maybe build a strategy deck. There was a wide variety of things that I was able to do. And the one that I ended up thinking the most about was sitting next to the writer or the podcaster and thinking about how we can make their job better. How do we make it grow faster? How do we make their technology better that we're using so that they can be in a position to win and focus on the storytelling rather than the rest of the things going on in this hectic startup where we're constantly figuring out how to solve problems we didn't know exist the week prior. And once Morning Brew grew and sold and scaled, it was looking around and this creator economy buzzword had really caught my attention because it was putting that writer, podcaster, creator, producer first. And so I started to think more about that. I was talking to more of these people. We were meeting a lot of these people through the internet, through Twitter. So it's just been this like very interesting experience into this Twitter world where you get to meet a lot of these really smart people digitally first. And so I was consulting. I quit my job after Morning Brew sold. And what I realized I fell into it again was these creators have incredible ideas. They have incredible business opportunities, but in order for them to stay alive, they need to focus 80+% of their time on creating content and engaging with their audience. So all the back office work, all the long-term planning, thinking years and years ahead rather than just what's the next video or what's the next season. I was able to try and be a sounding board and to take on a lot of that work and come back to the creator and be a collaborator at that sense. And that's really shown to be pretty valuable. We've been able to create this whole smooth operations company off of that thesis that we can take a lot of work off of the creator's back, similar to a COO or a co-founder or a partner, rather than a manager or a talent agent, which are more like Hollywood-esque jobs and career paths that I'm learning a lot about this year to understand what's been the previous perception of management, where do they go right, where do they go wrong. But as is such with the creator economy, it's been this like really fascinating combination of technology, media, Hollywood, talent, all these different things, advertising. And so with all these different changes that I'm sure we'll talk about, we've been able to position ourselves right there next to the creator to say, we want to help build these organizations, identify the right business models, use that part of our brain, the business side of it, and let them really be the innovators on the creative side. But if that's a partnership, we can create really, really interesting businesses. Which again, we'll get into, but I think that there's a lot of different types of creator businesses, and just blanket statement, creator economy is something that we can leave behind in 2021.
That's good. I love the theme of we should probably do an episode on things we're going to leave behind in 2021. I'm glad you started off with the reference to talent agencies, Hollywood, those parts. I'm sure you've read your Michael Ovitz, founding of CAA. The part that's really relevant there is CAA was founded in the 1970s when the old Hollywood system was really breaking down. So you were at a moment of transition from the big studio system to something new that was quickly emerging, and you saw people at more stolid traditional institutions realize they could leave, start something new, and redo how the industry is done. So within that context, and to your point about looking at how talent agencies are now looking at the space, how Hollywood is looking at the space, what do you think the existing talent management systems, what are they doing right or what are they doing wrong? Because if we're getting to the definition of what a creator operator is, I don't think you would describe yourself as an agent per se. So we'd just love to get your perspective on that part.
I'm still learning a lot about, it's such a big world. It's massive. These companies, the CAAs, the WMEs, the UTAs, all the other niche agencies and management companies in between, there are so many. And I guess my general understanding is that, yes, if you look at the historical, I did my homework and I read my Who is Michael Ovitz book, and I've gone deeper into that, is that was like the era of gatekeepers, that you could only produce so many movies per year. You could only have so many songs on the radio per year. And there really was a limitation to that total inventory that has completely disappeared. And then the barriers to entry have completely disappeared, and distribution totally wide open, and things that I'm sure listeners of this podcast have already started to realize, but that is a dramatic shift in what can be created and who gets to create it. And now it looks like these companies are still better positioned to be agents in the sense of partnerships, of what's the really big ad deal? How can I sell a show to that network? Less so company building. And a lot of them are building departments that look like accelerators, that look like startup incubators. Pietra's another one. And I saw that they did a deal with a talent agency to offer their services where it's, hey, I'm an influencer and I want a custom candle to sell to my audience. How do we snap our fingers and do that as a service? But they're so big. And I think if you look at like the startup incubator world, they're really intimate relationships. So some of them are bigger, like the YCs of the world, but a lot of the ones that we see are more intimate relationships and custom fit to the particular startup they're trying to solve. Where these bigger talent agencies, yes, they have different departments. It just seems very very generalized, and you have to find the right agent at the end of the day. So it's just not as specific as I think it could be. When we're looking at Smooth Ops, we're being very, very specific about the type of creator that we want to work with. And we're not saying that we can just take on anybody with a big follower count. We're saying actually there's a more particular nature that we're starting with that we can get good at because we can't do everything at once.
I think what's fascinating there, and this is why your reference to gatekeeping is so important, a huge plot point in Who is Michael Ovitz is this whole battle in the early 90s between whether Jay Leno or Dave Letterman got the 11 o'clock slot for the evening talk show. And just for our content in 2021, that question doesn't even make any sense for the people that you're talking to. Like, there's no such thing as a time slot. There's an amorphous, hey, do we have similar audiences? So if we release on Tuesday and they release on Tuesday, is that going to cut down? But that whole time-based metric just doesn't make any sense anymore.
It doesn't make sense. And it's actually become collaborative. If you're Jay Leno and you're Letterman, you actually want to work together to make really great content. And that's where you see, like, on TikTok stitching and everything, like, it's better to play nice and to bring these followers together and to amplify and to get more attention and to do these crossover events than to say, actually, no, we're competitors because there's only one slot. So I think that what's been filling that vacuum is what should be a really good energy for collaboration.
Well, that's actually a fascinating point, because let's get into who exactly is competing then. Because the key thing is, and once again, I'm really using this episode to push people to read Who is Michael Ovitz, because it's just a fascinating book that is super conventional wisdom now, but it's actually just helpful to think about these things. If you're looking back at the 1990s, you're talking about CBS and NBC. They are selling ad deals based on those time slots. So, like, that is why there's a competition. It's not as if Jay and Dave are literally competing against each other. The actual ad teams at those networks are competing. So now, as you're helping individual creators build their own media companies, are you suggesting that today, moving forward, as we go into 2022, there really is less of a zero-sum game? And if that's true, does that apply to media companies today too? So if you're Vice or Vox Media or even Spotify, just how does competition work today then, beyond just the straightforward collaboration?
It's a good question. I'm trying to internalize it also about how I think about competition right now. I think there are so many ad dollars in so many different categories that calling it competing for ad dollars seems short-minded. I don't know if you agree with that. If we just knock off are we competing for ad dollars? Probably not anymore. Are we competing for direct revenue subscribers that might give me $10 a month for something? Maybe, but the internet is so massive that it's not like you're not thinking about like the Netflix month over month ads or the quarter over quarter ads. Like the internet is so massive that I think for any one creator to say we're competing for this same exact subscription seems also kind of short-sighted, where I think at least today, let's say the stuff that's in 2021 and maybe changing for 2022 is that we're competing a lot for talent. Is to scale, you need more people. So whether it's other editors and producers, whether it's other collaborators, whether it's other operators, what I'm seeing on the front lines is the hardest part is finding the right people to do these deals with. And it can be any type of partnership, but the people that are savvy that can say, okay, I understand this new format. I understand YouTube Shorts and the difference between that and Reels and TikTok. And I see how that has to make money there. I think that human capital race is where I'd get most competitive. But when it comes to like the user facing side, I think it's a party right now. Everybody should be having as much fun as possible.
That's awesome. And I want to get to, and by the way, feel free to push back, push your own stuff to me too. But I think I really want to emphasize the how big the internet is point, because I think it's something that people intuitively understand, but they don't explicitly understand. Can you really expand on what the implications of that idea is in terms of they're really just, we're transitioning from this world where there's one time slot, there are three main stations, there's HBO, there's Showtime, to actually there's a billion different things.
But all the examples you just gave are entertainment focused, and I'll twist and both push what I'm really excited about with my business and to show how big the internet is that if you get out of just like pure play entertainment, there's so much stuff going on in the world and on the internet. So I really like trade associations. I think that it's an old business industry, and that the way that people meet each other in an industry, get smarter, get certified, keep up to date, is a trade association. And if you start to look at convention centers around the world and look at all the different conventions that used to go to these places every year, it's the most random set of people in the world. Plumbers for very particular types of toilets, literal seeds, like agricultural seeds. And there's thousands of people in each of these industries. And when you take away the geographic limitation, all of these people can congregate 24/7 asynchronously online. And so I've gotten this whole new re-education into how large and how deep each niche is on the internet. And I think it's fascinating because you got to take yourself out of your New York City bubble. You got to take yourself or myself out of the University of Michigan bubble. Like the world is really, really big, and it's hard to visualize. It's hard to truly understand, but it's incredibly exciting. And I think one way that I've experienced it most is when you make friends online and then they become friends in real life. Is that like reversing that flow of social relationships and not going from, oh, we met in real life, now let's follow each other on Instagram, to actually, oh, we met each other through a different platform and we're going to go meet up, same as what you and I have done. Like I think that's an experience that if more people had it, they would understand how vast the internet is and how you can find really like-minded people that you enjoy, and that can push you in different ways. Beyond it. So there's a personal side to it, there's a business side to it, but the internet is just absolutely massive. And there's like these moments, these visceral reactions you can have when you're sitting at your computer and you feel like you've traveled miles and miles. I hope more people get to have beyond people that are even listening to this podcast. Like if you're listening to this, like you're leaning into a certain extent. If you know about On Deck, you're very much leaning in. But all of the friends that we went to high school with, all of our friends that just like don't really, haven't really caught up to what I think is very much the future. I hope that like the future can come to them sooner.
That's great. So you said the word, so I'll ask you the question. Tell me about your vision for the future.
The entire future.
The entire future in 2 paragraphs or less.
This goes.
What are we building? Well, here's the question. Let me be more fair to you because that was tremendously unfair. What do you think we are building towards? That is a better way of describing the future, quote unquote.
Okay, I will give you my optimistic answer, and hopefully our optimism will prevail. And this is where I get excited about the Web3 and the crypto stuff, and I'm trying to educate myself much better in this. But my understanding of the internet as it is today is that there are a couple internet companies that really dominate and set a lot of the rules for how we interact digitally. And that is not democratic. That is not even in capitalist. You're seeing trillion-dollar companies really build more and more power over time. And I think that's great for a number of reasons. But when I think about what is capitalism, what is democracy, and I read about Web3 and how you're better compensated for your contribution to a platform, about how better ideas can spark up because there's fewer gatekeepers again to what a platform can look like. Users can only have so much impact on Facebook properties. Users can only have so much impact on what YouTube looks like and acts like and feels like. But in my understanding of how these different governing rules and just the different number of social platforms that can sprout up in a Web3 environment, I get really excited about that. That to me just feels like a better version of the future where more people have the opportunity to contribute and to get value back in the same sentence. So that's like a very vague and abstract view of it. But that's what I hope is like the next generation of the internet, where we're saying we have all these tools. We know how to build marketplaces. We know how to build apps. A lot of that has become relatively commoditized. But if we apply it in the right ways and the right people get involved, more people can win for the just reasons.
Building on that, something that...
Do you buy that?
The problem is that I think this is why you and I get along. You gave a very moderate case for it. So yes, I buy that because you didn't, because here's the key thing. You didn't overstate it and say the New York Times is quaking in its boots before the Web3 tidal wave that will overwhelm and eliminate all gatekeepers. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a way, and I think this is, and maybe it's because you come from a media background, and that's actually an important reality here, which is that I think it's very easy to overestimate and make dramatic overstatements about the power of the internet and to underestimate the ability of existing institutions to actually evolve and change. You get in arguments of people in the crypto space and they say things like, oh, like the blockchain is going to destroy the New York Times because truth will be on the ledger. And I'm like, hey, you do know that the New York Times has like an internal blockchain project and they actually are pretty excited about it. So
there's a lot of smart people there. And it's the same thing. There's a lot of smart people at CAA. These companies are not just old, stodgy, like the same thing that they were when they were founded. And to that point, like you look around any city, you've got old streets, new buildings, posters that come up and down, like everything is going to be living at once. Like we will see all of this coexist in some shape or form. So yeah, maybe it's from a media background, but I like the idea. It doesn't have to be a whole new tidal wave or Noah's flood sort of situation for it to be coexisting and saying we've got part of the future and part of the past right here.
Oh, I love that. I actually really I'm probably going to steal that metaphor, by the way. I guess I'm telling on myself, but just the idea of thinking of a city as something that has, I'm in Williamsburg, so you have like brand new development, but you also have like the park and you also have a traditional historical preservation area. So that's actually really helpful. So then let's focus on the older parts. Pretend, for example, you work at the New York Times and you're seeing the fact that the really, really talented people in our age cohort are getting reached out to by people like you. They see what Alex Cooper is doing with Call Her Daddy and going independent. They see Substack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they say to themselves, wait, I'm 30. I spent my years in the trenches. Why does it make sense for me to build my brand where I am? Because if I think of these people, I think of, set aside their political views for a second, or I think of the Kara Swishers and the Andrew Ross Sorkins. These are people, Joe Weisenthal is at Bloomberg, Kara Swisher is at the New York Times / Fox Media, and Andrew Ross Sorkin is at the New York Times. So it's CNBC. So it's hard to imagine a world where people of their talent level, at a peer performance level, in our age cohort, whoever these people are, it's hard to see them staying 20, 30 years, the way those previous characters stayed at their big institutions. So if you're just at the Times, you're at CNBC, you're at Bloomberg, how would you think of that dynamic?
All right. It's not, I like this question. And for me, I, again, will internalize it to my work with Kinsey Grant. Kinsey Grant worked for 2.5 years at Morning Brew. Since left the company, similar to how I did. We came back together. We launched her new show, Thinking is Cool. That is very much hers, her vehicle for her journalism. But we're actively looking at a lot of the people that you just mentioned and thinking about what trajectories Kinsey Grant as a talent can take within this media world. Should she try and get a column at one of these other distribution players and build her brand alongside the New York Times, as Andrew Ross Sorkin did with CNBC and Squawk Box and Dealbook with the New York Times? Like, he has very much been his own entity, but he's been able to make long-term investments in some of these other platforms, and they made long-term investments in him. So I think those were really good trades, and those are still really good trades to say, I'm going to come in and do a show 2 or 3 times a week, call it 30% of my time. And my other 70%, I can work on my own stuff. I can alternate every couple of months with a different partner. So I think that diversity and that you're eliminating like the monogamy for some of these journalists who used to very much have to be a 100% full-time employee to a media company. They're saying, no, actually, I can have some optionality and take over some of the leverage. So I actually still like some of those examples, the Joe Weisenthal, the Kara Swishers. But looking forward, it's what else can Kinsey Grant do? And we're going to figure that out. But I still actually like those. I don't have a big problem with signing a long-term deal. Somebody recently made a comment to me about how media and creators think pretty short-term, next episode, next season. And a lot of these bigger companies, if you're the New York Times, you're thinking about the next decade. If you're a tech company, you're definitely thinking about the next decade. You're not thinking in 1-year increments. And so how do you, as a creator that wants to build a company that can create passive income for yourself and not just make money every time you make another episode, how do you think longer term? And I think longer term deals are part of that equation. So I'm still figuring it out. I'm open to all ideas if you've got one.
Yeah, no, and I love your invocation of the longer term because look at the New York Times. They set out after they put the hard paywall again to say we're going to hit 10 million subscriptions by 2025, digital subscriptions. And everything they do is oriented towards that goal. And once again, you're getting at why the services you're providing are actually really useful because I can't imagine. I vaguely think of my career along the lines of, hey, like I do 3 podcasts. What is that going to look like in 10 years? But I'm not actually thinking at a business and operations level there, right? That helps me say, hey, don't really worry about this next episode. Maybe Josh and I bomb it. Who cares? It's a 10-year time frame. But it's totally different to say like, no, but straight up, there is a business plan and an actual broad strategy for approaching that. So I think that's a really important thing. And that's actually something that creators, operators, co-founders, whatever, should be thinking more about. Because I think if you just look at a lot of people, that's where you just see there's a bit of a gap. You get the sense that people are kind of just saying, okay, hey, and even with top tier people, hey, like, how do I do this next podcast? Or, hey, Luminary is throwing money at me, so I'm just going to like do this thing and not really ask whether or not that's going to get you where you're trying to get. So I think that's a useful metric.
I enjoy those conversations. For me, that's some of the most fun stuff to be like, all right, well, what are we doing? It's the planning sessions. And at heart, I'm a project manager. So thinking about the short-term project, the long-term, that to me is what comes natural. Storytelling, making videos, being on a podcast like this, not natural, but this is actually very fun.
To interrupt real quick, I just want to highlight why I really appreciate you, Josh. You've done this a couple of times where I think your superpower is that you find very lame things. I'm a project manager at heart. I love trade associations. You find things at surface level are actually pretty like unexciting, but then you actually find a way to niche them into something really interesting. And I think it's really important to call you frequently will say things like this, and I think it's very funny.
I like it. I like what I do. And I'll do other fun stuff, but for work, this is what I like to, and I don't think work has to be fun. Like, I don't have to like love work, but I like these things a lot and I like doing them. But with the Kinsey Grant thing, then you talk about the new options that a Kara Swisher or an Andrew Ross Sorkin might not have had when they started their career. So when we think about Thinking is Cool as a brand, where she gets to pick out contentious topics like, do you masturbate ethically, or would you work for Barstool, or should Greek life exist? And you can make a card game out of that, or something like that, a trivia game or something like that. It's become so much easier to make products like that if she did 10x her audience, 100x her audience, she could then have this other side brand that doesn't require her to have hands on deck hands on keys every single moment. So I don't know if Kara Swisher would have created her own product or her own sub brand or her own community or her own Discord channel for her fans, but there's new options available to the Kinsey Grants of the world, who I think are like the next cohort of these people. And I want to keep pushing and understanding what different businesses can they create in their wake.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's funny in the tech space, because once again, you and I tend to be more media oriented. A lot of people like to dunk on Scott Galloway for bad Scott Galloway predictions, this or that. So I want to tell all my audience members who are up in arms over me bringing this up to just put individual specific beliefs to the side. I think Scott is doing an amazing job at all of this. I think he actually is, if you're looking at, you have this brand, you have this individual, you have a story you're telling. He has his section for education startup. He still works at an established institution, aka he's a professor, but he does it on his own terms, aka it's mostly digital now, and he's out in Florida. He's not in New York City. He does shows with Vice. He tried to do a show with Bloomberg. That's a whole other topic. Mm-hmm. He has a newsletter. We had him on the Realignment to talk about his book. And what he did with his book was he and his team, they looked at the fact that he does the Pivot podcast and his Prof G show, which is done through New York media. And what they actually did is they took the transcripts and they turned it into a book, and then they sold a book. I think this is brilliant. I look at what Scott's doing. I'm like, man, like, considering that he's in his 50s, if I spent the next 20 years doing all of that, that would be incredible. And I think people should really, everyone who's trying to hop on the content game right now, because we're seeing a lot of people do this, should be looking at what he's doing. Less what he's saying maybe, but look at what he's doing and say, like, that is just the beau ideal of what you want to do.
And then he'll do some speaking, some consulting. He had LT Carter. Yeah, I mean, that is like a masterclass in business creation.
And I think the question then for you is, we're talking about how it's exciting that the internet can let people monetize and develop a brand and their audiences and everything. Something I wonder about you is, how do people get good when they go independent in their 20s? So here's what I mean by this. I look at the Karas and the Andrews and the Joe Weisenthals, and look, Kara Swisher, before she got really big, was in the trenches of the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. She wrote 2 really good books on AOL. I got in a bit of a AOL kick during lockdown. She wrote these really wonky, very good reported books on AOL's history. This is before she's wearing the aviator sunglasses. This is really just, she's a reporter in Washington, D.C. How do you think talent should think about the fact that by going independent, they're gaining more control, but they're probably skipping the boot camp phase? You know, so it's definitely true that it's really cool that Kinsey gets to do Thinking is Cool, that I get to host 3 podcasts, but by not being at established institutions, no one's saying, hey, Marshall, I know you just want to talk about creator economy stuff, but actually you need to do this really deep reporting on X topic. Even if it bores you, we know, because this is what we're actually good at. In 5 years from now, you're going to be an amazing reporter. How do you think about that part?
Isn't that similar to anybody going independent early? Like, I have not been a director of whatever at another company. Like, I don't have the resume to be a CEO, to be managing people in theory. 26 years old, couple years of work experience, did a year at PwC, went independent, just like, I'm figuring it out. And so I don't think it's specific to media. I don't think it's specific. Like, I think you look at other young tech founders and you're like, are they, and like, that's the branding of being a first-time founder. There's probably a similar word for being like an early independent creator, that you're going to make a couple mistakes, that you might have to get a coach. You're probably going to have to maybe hire management at some point when you get too big for something. That I think like there is something that we need to like paying homage to people that have 15 years of experience in a particular field and saying like, hey, like, we need your help. So I don't think it's an impediment to saying, I want to take this risk earlier. I want to start building equity in myself, in my brand, in my company earlier, the same way people do in other industries. But I need help, and I can afford that help. I can pay for that help. I can network into that help if I'm nice to people, if I'm helpful to other people. So I think, and Kinsey and I talk about this, like, neither of us are the best at what we do. Like, we hope to look back in 10 years and say, wow, we were really bad at our jobs. We learned a lot better. We know how to make a much better podcast. We know how to plan much better. And I think that's a great, like, I want to aspire to that. We learned that at Brewer. Like, we want to make ourselves look stupid. And that's like going to be the transformation we take. And as long as we're continuing to like work with good people right now, I think we do have enough good energy and good ideas to get to the next step. So it's not saying like we're not going to be too scared and go back to big companies and learn for another set of years. But it's a good question. Like, we need to keep that top of mind, that we don't know everything.
What's so interesting about that is, I like how you compared it to launching a startup or being a tech founder, because look, people at traditional institutions could laugh at people who haven't graduated from college, people who are in their 20s launching companies and saying, what are you talking about? Where's your MBA? Why haven't you spent 10 years at Procter & Gamble? X, Y, and Z thing. And I think at a notable level, it has been demonstrated over the internet, the category is different enough that maybe if there was a case to be made for that in the 70s and 80s, there is just something different that enables us to really exist. I think the point of pushback.
Also, we're all constantly learning. None of us are done learning. Like, that's the reason why we read all these things and read these books and talk to these people. Like, we are still actively learning and asking a lot of questions. We're not being like, all right, we left our education when we graduated and got our diploma. That is so far from it. I think like the energy of a lot of the spaces we occupy right now is like, you need to be a lifelong learner. And if you don't position yourself that way, you're already going to get caught off by the next NFT craze and have no idea what that is.
So, okay. So that's, actually, I want to say one quick thing before we pivot to the lifelong learning point, because that's very helpful. I guess what I was getting at with the getting good question, I was talking to a couple of my friends who are at the Wall Street Journal. And what's so fascinating about the Journal is, if you were to construct an institution that's just the exact opposite of everything we're describing, it'd be the Journal. For example, if you are a promising young 20-something there you're not a columnist. If you are doing a good job, you get more editing work. You get to do a weekend interview. And then in your 30s, once you've gone through this very specific process, then you're able to actually do something. And I think the thesis there would be is that the person who's going through that process is going to be tremendously talented at what they're doing. So I'm just interested, giving the framework you just gave of relating tech founders to the MBA debate 20 years ago, we are actually going to see a debate within these legacy institutions and future-facing ones of, is it possible that this system works or doesn't work?
Oh, I have no idea. The people that will get trained like that will be trained to do a very specific thing, and the rate of change continues to increase. So are they going to end up having a skill that was really valuable 5 years ago? Like, they're not learning TikTok. They're not learning other formats that are undeniably very popular right now. Like, long form journalism, I think, is very important, and like good reporting is very important from a value to society. But when we think about like what's getting the impressions and what's getting attention, they might not be learning the skills because those are just being tested out in the field right now. We're figuring out how those are actually operationalized and who's good at it and why, and how do you loop a video? How do you get the right music in? Like, these are ways that the internet is working that I don't know if they're teaching, but they'll have really strong fundamentals, which I think is also important because it's always going to be text-based or audio and video. Like, those elements are going to be there no matter what, just because we're human. I think, again, but if I'm building a creator company, right? Let's say I'm building a new company in this media creator entertainment space 5 years from now, I'll probably want a mix of people. I'll probably want some people that are just like built off the internet, learned while they were doing some random stuff, some people from the Journal, some people from the Times, some people from another type of media company, somebody from TikTok. Like, that would be the strongest formulation of a company possible, to say like, all right, let's get a diversity of experiences and build something great. So each individual can then add up to something that's much more dynamic. Maybe that's the right answer. That will be my answer for today.
Yeah. Third time's the charm. Quick question before we have another great question from producer Jackson. Talk more about social platforms and impressions, because I'm interested by your invocation of TikTok, Reels. I don't want to say RIP, but Reels. I don't have TikTok, so I am the weird Reels first user that there are definitely not many of. There are dozens of us. At the same time, there's also YouTube, and there's all these different formats. There was / still kind of is Clubhouse. There's Twitter Spaces. How do you all think about that? Because something that always interested me about business casual at Morning Brew is you had this massive podcast platform, but you all were never that aggressive on YouTube. So how do you? So I'll ask this question two different ways. Take it wherever you want to go. One, how does a creator decide whether or not that big impressions-based format is the right thing for them? Because it might not be. Ben Thompson of Stratechery doesn't need to get big on TikTok. That's not his model. So how do you decide as a creator, and how do you advise creators how they should think about these things? But then two, once you've oriented yourself, how do you decide between investing in a platform, and at what point can you expand platforms, but at what other point? I've asked you way too many questions, so I'm really just testing your ability to keep ideas in your head. At what point are platforms contradictory? Because for a quick example, to give you a time to get your answer together, I was thinking about this in the realignment context. We are doing really well for our podcast downloads, and we've just started getting much bigger on YouTube. But what I quickly noticed is that the content that does well on YouTube is not the same type of content that does well on the podcast. So I'm in this weird position where I have to decide, hey, do I want to get bigger on YouTube? That means I'm going to have to change something about the actual podcast. And, the podcast is monetized differently. So there's all these things to sort through. So we just love your broad thoughts on what I'm bringing up.
I might reorder some of your questions. We'll see how many I knock off. We'll have a list.
All 10 of them. Yeah.
Sometimes it's not that deliberate of a choice. somebody was being creative, wanted to express themselves, and it just so happened that they got really big on X platform. Cool. Great. That's awesome. They found a fit. That is, again, we're going to keep trying to trade vocabulary, product market fit. I found product market fit on Instagram Reels. Cool. Congratulations. That's already hard enough. That's a huge check mark. Could be on any platform. Then how do you continue to grow into it? I think about platforms in two general categories right now. One is quality, one is quantity. The quantity is going to be more like a marketing funnel, which is how do I get big really, really fast? And that's going to be on the new formats that I'm very excited about because anybody can go viral. There's no social graph. It's the ability to really tap into who the content is meant for as quick as possible. That's why I'm really excited about that. But you could say the same thing about Twitter, Instagram to a certain extent. But you can have really high follower counts. And I'd say the value of each follower is probably lower than what I would call a quality buckets, which is mostly YouTube, podcast, and newsletter. It is significantly easier to monetize a YouTube channel, a podcast, or a newsletter than it is a really large follower count. Like you're not actually accessing that high of a percent of those followers on the quantity platforms. So how do you kind of have, let's try and get one of each. Mm-hmm. So for Kinsey Grant, she's pretty big on Twitter. We're doing really well on the podcast right now. For Colin and Samir, YouTube is this weird middle ground where it's also their marketing channel, but we've realized that through Shorts and through TikTok and through Twitter, we can access a much bigger audience without as much input and drive people back to this YouTube show that we're able to advertise very, very well on right now. And that's not AdSense, that's direct partnerships and saying, hey, we've got really the attention for a longer amount of time. The amount of time that you put into a YouTube video or a podcast or reading a newsletter at the bottom is a dramatic amount more. It's a better investment than, oh, I saw the tweet and I liked the tweet and I kept going. So there's like a level of intimacy that changed, I think, when you look at it from quality and quantity. And then each of these platforms are changing. So I can keep going into like each of these different ones. So you'll have to tell me when to stop.
No, please,
it's really hard.
Please go.
It's really hard to grow a podcast without being on another platform. There's no referral program. The discoverability on the apps is still pretty brutal. There's no algorithm. You're not able to A/B test subject lines. You don't get data like click-through rate from YouTube, but the completion rates are much higher than any platform that I've seen. So if you really are a strong and loyal podcast listener, you're more often than not getting to the end where watch times on YouTube are like 10% of a video. You want to keep that retention number high, but I'm sure you've seen on Breaking Points like the YouTube retention numbers, and it's really hard to retain a YouTube audience because people are just constantly churning through on that platform. But if you hit play on a podcast, you're much more likely to stick around. So that develops a much better relationship with the person. And then my segue from this is goes back to what is your business model? Are you forming a really strong knit community that you're able to convert on something else? Or do you need to be moving millions of impressions a month so you can satisfy your advertising? And it can be a mix of both, but you got to know what you're optimizing for it. And right now we're seeing this value of building communities that doesn't require having 750,000 followers. You can really build something awesome with 20,000, 50,000, something like that.
You know, I'm glad you brought up community because that also takes us back to the Web3 conversation where there's ideas of changing community expectations. I've talked about this and this is not just my point, but what does it look like to reward the first people who started listening to Kinsey or the people who are the most intense listeners and viewers of Colin and Samir? There's the DAO conversation. How do you think about the changing? Because I think there's been a lot of talk about how Web3 could have huge implications for audiences, but I haven't really seen operationalization of this because I think it's super helpful that you brought up, I don't want to say our normal friends, but a useful check that every listener should think about right now is I feel so left out of the Web3 conversation right now. I mean, I talk about it every week, but you know, I haven't bought anything. And then every other week, someone has a new cool profile avatar. And I'm just like, man, it's just my old headshot from 2019. Side note, I need to get that replaced. But that's all happening. But then I go back to Oregon and my friends are they're not doing anything here. So I just would love for you to talk about audience. And because once again, if we're actually thinking of what grows breaking points, what grows the realignment, what grows Colin Samir, what grows Kinsey, despite the blue check wars and Twitter being cool and social clout and what party you get invited to, that isn't what actually grows audiences. That isn't what actually builds these products. So just talk about it within that context.
All right. This is the new part for me. We'll see how this goes. This is the different types of creators. We're seeing the NFT craze, and it's with artists. Like, we're looking at people make these cool headshots. Also, I'm not really in on that, but I'm watching from the periphery. And I think about artists and NFTs. I'm in the back of it, just kind of watching. It's kind of creepy that way. But for artists and NFTs, that makes sense, is that they're making a scarce amount of work and they want to retain the value of that work. So instead of just having like their art go on Instagram and get a couple likes, they actually get true monetary value out of it. And the people that value it most also get true monetary value out of it and for owning it. So I get that from an application sense. And this is the space that I love to play in, which is, oh, that's a really cool core technology. How do we apply it? That's where I enjoy thinking the most. And so for these more community-oriented creators, the thinking is cool community, the Colin and Samir community, we're thinking about what does that community look like when you can build a better infrastructure around it. And that to me is the DAO application. And my understanding of a DAO is that it's much more like a true community, a micro economy, rather than a bundle of products. We could go and in a Web 2 sense, create a Discord channel, a job board, education courses, some consulting infrastructure. That to me would be a bundle of products, and you could pay a certain amount per month, hopefully put it on the corporate card, never forget about it, never question it, just keep signing up. And that would be a bundle of products that you would get access to for a fee. In the Web3 version, I think it opens up so many other avenues for other people to build products into the community, for other people to take money out of the community, not just the people that are owning it and running it. And so this goes to, and I'll stop there, but that to me is where DAO and community, which is seemingly obvious if you're like really deep in it, but I'm starting to see how we can make the choice between, do we want to build a micro economy and be the mayor of it? Or do we want to build a bundle of services and be the CEOs of it? And there's some like big differences about who you would hire, how you would start to build things, how you prioritize the roadmap, that I'm trying to just simulate on paper and then put forward to some of the creators I work with and say, hey, we're all getting really excited about these new buzzwords, but this is what I actually think about it. And I took a stab at building the model in Excel because I've never really seen anybody build the DAO business model. And so those are the ways that I'm trying to learn more about it, and getting very excited to go back to that city metaphor, which is these things are communities at heart. So if you are bringing food to the farmer's stand, if you're playing music, if you're cleaning it up, you get value in and out, and you just transpose those different types of activities and value props toward what does it look like for a community of creator economies, or a community of people that like to think hard about stuff and enjoy the good discourse.
What did you learn from the DAO business model in Excel? That's really interesting.
I still have no idea. It's like a velocity. You end up optimizing for velocity of transactions, and you want to constantly get more people doing more things rather than just like pure play subscribers. And so it gets a little bit confusing, but you end up trying to like understand like how it looks more like the Fed, I guess, or you're holding an economy up and you get to hold the currency. So you want the currency's value to go up, and the way that the value of the currency goes up is that more of it is used more often. So I don't know. I have to go back to school for that. I get completely lost, but I don't know how you would put on paper any sort of, this was my stab at it, but if you've talked to anybody, or if you've seen how somebody can model out a DAO, I'd be super interested, because this would be like a core business piece that we wouldn't be able to say yes to. We can't just build a DAO unless we're able to project revenues and costs. Otherwise, how are we going to actually operate it?
And that's where it gets from And I have no answer to that question. I would not be doing this if I did. But the real secret here is I think that's what gets to what has to happen in 2022 if all this is real, which is that there's plenty of content to do around these ideas, but the question is really going to be pedal to the metal. What actually operationalizes this? And that's the opportunity. So in our last section here, I want you to do some pro bono news you can use work for our audience, because I'm sure you've noticed this, but I think definitely this was a COVID, everyone's working from home thing. I've seen so many people in the tech media space really want to get into becoming content creators themselves. So you're seeing a lot of top tier VCs start doing YouTube shows, launching podcasts. You have younger people, on the VC side. Harry Stebbings in 20VC is definitely a real innovator in terms of really building an audience and getting bigger. You have Packy McCormick, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone wants to get in on this side of the game. It's really why I keep seeing another well-produced, not particularly engaged with, but well-produced show coming out every other week. So I'd love for you just to give your broadest advice to anyone, and this is me not just asking you for free advice because I don't count, because I'm lucky to partner with a co-host who has a massive YouTube platform. So my growth kind of happens organically. So put me to the side and put you and Kinsey to the side because you guys started at Morning Brew. How do you advise these actually straight up independent creators who maybe have, like, they were a product manager at Airbnb, something at Google, but they're trying to build something new now? How do you advise they think about their growth in the next 10 years?
Have fun. The internet spaces, and when you're just getting started, it should be expressive. It should be, how do you explore new ideas? How do you tell stories that might not have been told before? How do you do something and create something that you haven't already found on the internet? I think it should come from a point of self-expression, self-discovery, and you can be selfish about it, because that goes back to how big the internet is that if you are that particular and you use your voice and you do something that really makes your head spin, other people will find it that have very similar interests to you. And then you'll start to find those other humans that you can collaborate with. And rather than just putting out your newsletter or putting out your tweet, you have to engage as well. You have to comment on other YouTube videos. You have to reply to newsletters. You can comment on tweet threads, like, be a part of the conversation. I think that barrier to entry is another one of those things that have completely disappeared, that if you start asking questions, even, you don't have to have all the answers, but if you start just engaging with the communities that you want to be a part of or that are catching your eye, and you contribute to them, then I think people will start to respect you, and you'll find more ideas, and other people will come to you with ideas, and it all becomes quite natural. So it's not so much focused on how do I make my first dollar, how do I hit 100 followers. It's how do I have fun on here and engage and just like post things that you feel confident about. So that, I guess that's my pro bono answer, which like everyone's forgetting to have fun with it. And it's like, this should be a fun field.
I love the way you put it, the last bit, which is that everyone's forgetting to have fun, because I get the sense that we're reaching peak on making a Twitter thread about Twitter thready things and using that as a growth hack. That not only is overdone, but it also doesn't feel fun. It doesn't feel authentic. And the thing that I would, to give my piece of advice to folks who are doing this is, if you're doing this independently, aka if this isn't your day job, you by definition have time. You have the money to buy an expensive studio. You are either post-exit, you're angel investing, you're doing this or that. Or maybe you have a flexible work from home job where you do this on the side. So if you have time, you can relax. I think that the problem with people seeing people like Colin and Samir blow up, Kinsey blow up, Sagar blow up, is they get this desperate need to just put stuff out there and just go. And I think that's what leads to the obsession with growth hacking. The second, and you talk to creators all the time too, but the second someone basically asks me the question, how do I like hack this? A part of my brain just shuts down, because not to be a jerk, but I'm kind of like, hey, like, you're a nice person, but this probably isn't going to work, because if that's your first principle, you're not going to actually succeed in this space.
I agree. I agree. And then you never know what happens. Like there's just like so much serendipity that can happen just from putting yourself out there on it. Um, that like if you go in a little bit more vulnerable and not just like headstrong about like here's the 4 things I learned. Here's time for a thread. Like that doesn't lead for any room of like what if. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's interesting to see a lot of these other people jump into content creation and realize that like they might have been very good at one thing, but not very good at this. And I think that's also a fun experiment to be like, all right, like go add another skill to the toolkit and get on top of it and struggle for a little bit. Like it's okay to fuck up and fail.
Yeah, that's the really useful place to put it. So for my last question, because I really am tantalized by this frame you set up at the start, things that are going to be left in 2021. They don't have to relate to content creation or any of this conversation. Just what are time for a podcast thread? What are the 4 things, 5, whatever, don't pick an actual number, of things you think are going to be left behind in 2021?
Things that, well, the first one I said was like blanket statement, creator economy, all creators are the same. I think we need to gain better vocabulary around different types of creators, influencers, people that are contributing online. I think that's one for sure. Damn, that's a hard question. What else are we leaving behind in 2021? Which is good. Today's Yom Kippur. So I'm like reflecting and all that good stuff.
We're working on a podcast today as we're doing that. But that's a whole other topic.
I'm talking to a friend. This is different. The rest of my calendar is empty. It's amazing as I stall for what else we can leave in 2021. I still think a lot of the rhetoric around crypto is like get rich quick. And I'd like to leave that behind and expand it from these are not just coins that's like which one should I invest in, but it's actually this is core technology that can do a lot of interesting things. And I mean that to the people that are very headstrong about NFTs and which one's dropping next week. I mean this about my friends that work in finance that are still writing off anything that has to get to do with Bitcoin. So I think like that narrative needs to expand significantly. Another one that I like to talk about is the concept of independence. And I think Substack did an unhealthy damage to the word independence to be like, you should go independent. You can make an annual salary by writing your newsletter at home and getting 100 subscribers. But I still think like there are a lot of these creators that can be independent in the sense that they own their IP, they own their relationship with the audience, but they still have a team, they still have helpers, they still might work for different people in smaller capacities, like that optionality we talked about before. So I think like that allure of being independent doesn't have to mean do it alone. It gets really hard. I guess the same thing with like these creators in COVID is like a lot of them are making all this stuff in their bedrooms by themselves. And that's really hard. Like you're doing it at home, but like you've got a good team around you. You work with a number of people. So it's not that lonely, but some people don't have the luxury of having people to confide in or to have the sounding board. So I think like also like just like, yeah, that whole idea of independence and trying to make people realize that like if they're working on something, they should be doing it with other humans. It'll make it more enjoyable. It'll make it go faster. It'll make it go longer. How'd I do? I
just want to, for my last word here, then I want to build on what you just said, because it really resonates with me, because I was having a conversation about my career with someone who enjoys the work I put out. And I was just asking for advice. They're in the industry, and they basically just said, yeah, just, you should be going independent. And to your Substack, I'm like, that's actually not useful, because if I were to say what needs to be left behind in 2021 and 2020, it's treating independence as a positive good in of itself. So for example, I'm doing this On Deck podcast, but I have Jackson on the production side. He's listening to this episode. He's helping me. He's sending me like really good questions as we're going. He's writing great intro, outro copy. We have Julian who leads the team here. That's all great. That's awesome. And I have this isn't just me saying nice things about On Deck. Like I actually have a really great setup here. I'm having a really great time, and giving me the advice of, but you're not independent. That literally is not helpful, because actually attaching myself to an institution is actually really helpful. So I hope we can be to your point, then we need to go one lens deeper on the creator side, But we also have to help creators think through what they're doing and why they're doing it better. AKA, your first conversation point should not be, hey, Josh, like, go do your own thing. That's awesome. You don't want to get, hobbled by a gatekeeper or an institution, because that doesn't help people think through, especially when they should be thinking, hey, 10-year timescale. And look, like, for my stuff, in 10 years, I'll be 39 years old. That's wild, because looking at all of the older folks we talked about, I would still be 10 years younger than them. So, geez, like why? Like,
we have a lot of time.
Yeah, there's a lot of time. I'm not the honest answer is like, wait, do I have to, as long as I'm being compensated fairly, I don't have to just run out and go be independent. This is actually pretty great, especially on a long timeline.
Yeah, exactly. And things can change and you get optionality, and such is life. So yeah, I think it's a lot about who you work with, even like brands working with creators, which is a bit different of a tangent. But I think previously, for the past couple of years, we've looked at creators as like a marketing channel. And instead, if you look at them more as brand ambassadors and you're like, how do they help me get to know my audience better? How do they help me in different business functions? And you build like this halo effect of brand ambassadors that are influential and have really intimate understandings of your customer, maybe better than you do. That provides value in different ways beyond just like, did you convert sales? But that's like also a point that.
Whoa, I have to stop you there, because I was going to cut the interview off, but I want this to be the last question, because that's actually really fascinating. What is the difference between an influencer circa 2017 and a brand ambassador circa 2022? Because you're implying there's a difference there.
Yes, at least in my understanding, 2016 influencer, you got a ton of followers that really like you. They like your workout videos, and you're going to recommend a protein powder, and you're going to move product really well and maybe compete with like a Facebook CPA or like a Facebook conversion cost. And that's cool because the influencer gets to make money. Sure. And then we've seen a lot of weird narratives about creators becoming investors in some of these companies and getting equity and whatever it might be. But I think that still needs to be matured a bit. And instead of it just being like that marketing channel from 2016, but it's how does the brand ambassador come with me to a new company announcement? How do they speak to my team and push them to think in a very particular way and be compelling about it? How do they help me come up with like the real marketing campaigns, not just receiving like the talking points for a podcast read? So I think it becomes more collaborative, and it's like kind of like a part-time employee, and it's that longer term relationship. But if the influencer, the creator, and the brand themselves are appealing to the same audience, I think that they can share a lot of their knowledge and just do a lot better. It might even be like a way to get more investment or to recruit people to take jobs. But these influencers have influence in a lot of different ways, and it's not just to buy a product. I think there's a lot more. Like, these people are very smart. A lot of them are very, very bright. And to open the doors and say, hey, I'd actually like your input on more things works. And that's not saying you have like a deck of 100 of these, but to have 2 or 3 as a young company that really help and are incentivized to push, that long-term incentive, again, I find to be another area where we can make a lot of progress next year.
I keep cursing myself because I keep saying last question, but this is my real last question. Please don't say an interesting thing that will make me follow up. What is weird about the creator investor equity conversation? Because if we're talking about how we can make the internet look better, the reason why for me, the whole idea of creators getting equity in platforms, brands, companies, whatever, makes a lot of sense, because you look at what happened to Vine. Vine, it's the, TikTok precursor sold to Twitter. Vine, had all these creators on it, and the creators made this very concerted argument of like, look, like, we're driving the value here. Like, we drive this value, and if we don't feel compensated enough, we're going to leave. And they left, and that was a serious impact on the app. So for me, and once again, like the key question there, and where I'm open to debate, is like, are you actually driving the value? I don't think you can make the same argument on TikTok, but I think with Vine, there was a specific cultural moment where you could say that. So what is weird about the investor? Because it just seems to be, if we're saying, how can we make the internet make more sense? From my perspective, actually giving creators equity in the platforms they're building as if they are employees makes a lot of sense. So I'd love for you to clarify what you're saying.
sometimes, or not sometimes, a couple of my data points are instead of let's do a big campaign, it's, hey, would you like to invest? And then because you put a $10,000 to $30,000 check into a company, you feel like you have ownership. So you actually bought the equity in this scenario. And it's saying, whoa, hold on a second. Like maybe you should just take cash and just like be a really good partner, do fee for service, and make sure you get the money. And then the second is like, do you really believe in the company that wants you to be an equity holder in? Vine, I think, is interesting because it's a platform. These platforms can become incredibly valuable. But if it becomes more of like a retail product, like, are you sure that's a winner? And it becomes like an investor question. And if you're taking equity in startups, the best strategy is the venture strategy to take 30 plus positions in early stage companies and hope that a couple work out. But if you're a creator and you're being offered equity, or if you have the opportunity to get it, whether you're paying for it or not, you're paying for it somehow, whether it's time or money. You're getting equity in one company. And that's just a bad early stage investment strategy. Unless you're like thinking about it like you're an employee and you're saying, actually, I really believe in this. I'm an early stage partner. I want to have a little bit of upside. So I think it's a sophistication of the conversation. And I've seen it become just very attractive to become an investor because of like the social setting of it. And
it's good vibes.
It's good vibe. It's cool. I want to be an investor. Like that. Yeah, that sounds great. But yeah, I guess it's just a sophistication of it that it might also just be like my learning journey and understanding. But I've seen people make very quick decisions and be like, oh, that's awesome. I got equity. And I'm like, but why? Like, wouldn't you have rather have like another 50 grand or 100 grand or more? So yeah, but there's a lot of stuff to look forward to, which is really exciting. This is me trying to like segue out of any. We can talk for hours. We can hang out.
No, that is such a fascinating point to leave. And I just want to really just highlight to listeners what you just said there, which is that thinking about how is or how isn't this like the traditional venture model is a really great note. So it's a great place to leave it. Josh, I would love for you to shout out anything that people should check out of your work, the Smooth Ops website, Thinking is Cool, Colin and Samir, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's the stuff. We're working on a couple other clients right now. Hopefully get to name drop them pretty soon. SmoothOps.xyz. If you ever find a creator that you find is just awesome, just would love to get a little Twitter DM, be like, hey, this person's great. You should check them out. That'd be really cool. But it's just really great to be on here. This is really fun. Great to get to do it in a recorded setting. And yeah, appreciate it.